Amy Turnquist, and I'm your host for our next session. I'm excited to introduce our panelists where we'll be talking about emerging technologies and how they're being used to drive deeper experiences, deeper customer experiences with our audiences. I'm excited to introduce our panel today, and I would ask all three of you if you could please introduce yourself. If you have a disclaimer that you'd like to share with us, please go ahead and share that as well. And Beerju, I'll start with you.
Yeah, hey, I'm Beerju Patel, and I'm from AstraZeneca. And my disclaimer is that the views I express are of my own and not my company.
Thank you. How about Corinne?
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning. So Corinne, you're working in the Omnichannel, and all my views and opinion will be that of mine, and on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Corinne. And Dany.
Yes, hello, Dany Grave, digital transformation at Sanofi. And like my colleagues here, I'm speaking on my own behalf here today.
Okay, thank you. Thank all three of you for joining us. We will have, just a note for the audience, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists. You can type that in the chat feature or in the Q&A, and at the end of the conversation, we will have time to field some of those questions. So if there's something that you'd like to know, please do raise your hand virtually and put that in the chat, and we'll get to you through this process. So as I mentioned, we're talking today about emerging technologies being used to drive experiences. And so I thought what I'd like to do is start really thinking through what's happening today, right? So Beerju, if you can share with me, what is the most exciting technology you've seen or you've adopted yourself or you've tried or tested in the last 6 months? Can you tell us a little bit about what you tried and what you learned?
Yeah, so for me, I really look for technology that aims to make information sharing a little bit more convenient. And convenience is always great, but it's even more important in this post-COVID world. And you can really see the clear winners. You know, the rise of telehealth, the use of mobile apps like Apple Pay, Google Pay, grocery delivery, and the list really goes on. And sometimes we forget that HCPs are consumers themselves who look for that same type of convenience. And so in that vein, we ran a pilot with a new social talk platform named iLily. And what they did is they took the concept of a traditional podcast, but pared down the length of an audio post to just 15 seconds. And so instead of listening to one 30-minute podcast, you can hear from over 100 different speakers in that same 30-minute session. And so from our research, we knew that HCPs gravitated towards podcasts for information, but also admit that they have very little free time during the day. And so we knew that there was something with this iLily concept. And so we ran a pilot during one of the largest oncology congresses, ASCO. And this wasn't just a pilot for us, but it was actually the formal launch for iLily as well. And so not just a pharma first, but was the first for any industry on this social talk platform, which was pretty exciting. Given it was focused around a Congress event, there were all types of users submitting audio. So pharmaceutical brands like ours, key opinion leaders, Congress staff, and all were really looking for the latest trends and conversations that were buzzing around the conference itself. And so we were pretty fortunate to be a part of this official platform launch for iLily in that regard.
That's exciting to hear also that you were in from the ground floor, from the very beginning of all of this. So how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, based on the performance, our social audio post garnered one of the highest engagement rates on the platform, and we think it's because HCPs utilize the app the same way same way consumers use Twitter, and that's for timely updates and breaking news. And at the time, we had a data study come out that we wanted to raise more awareness around, which fit the platform perfectly.
Right. That's interesting. And we'll probably, if we have time, talk a little bit more about social as we get further into some of the questions. But thank you. That's a really interesting way, example, right, of how we're using some innovative technologies. So Corinne, what have you either tried or seen happen in the last 12 months that has gotten you excited about new possibilities?
Well, one comes to mind around serving patients in a different way. I think that we all have similar missions in healthcare, is to deliver better patient outcome as well as just better experience overall. We've been using natural language processing more recently in some form of triage into the call center that we have. So instead of constantly waiting for a patient to get somebody on the call, they send in a request by typing it into a website or sending an email. We're able to triage and send it to somebody faster. I think it's a pretty simple case, I would say, of using a technology that is fairly mainstream. But yet, sometimes you don't always think about using it just in those simple types of operational endeavors, and then you get to find out that you're able to serve patients faster. So that was one of the things we've done, and I don't think it was necessarily related to the pandemic. We've always wanted to get to patients faster and respond to their needs faster. Obviously, with the pandemic, there's been also of inquiries from a patient assistance program. So some of those programs also kind of merged about using this kind of technology. One other example, not that exciting, but for us it was. It's utilizing, machine learning in creating content blocks for email. The tougher one for us actually was our home office campaigns, but it was about triggered email. And being able to personalize that level of engagement between sales representatives and their customers. And that became definitely an impetus with the pandemic in making sure representatives understood the value of such a digital on really fast with the demand from the HCPs by the time they couldn't access them. So those were kind of two examples that we've had more recently, I would say, in the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I do want to talk a little bit more about machine learning as we get in. That's an important topic for us to talk through. But sticking with you, Corinne, too, just thinking through like some of these things that you and Beerju have just shared, these new platforms that are popping up all the time create new challenges, right? In terms of figuring out where do you start, what do you try, how do you evaluate some of these new technologies? So I'm wondering, what would you say is the best practice for some of those who might be in the audience thinking about, how do they start to weed through all of these choices and make decisions? How do you evaluate or select what you test?
So I would say maybe two pieces of advice, and definitely things that became evident to me in terms of being able to be successful in getting alignment with leadership on what particular digital solution or infrastructure to deploy, to invest in. One has been, and I would say it starts with culture, and it starts with where does the decision making start from? And I think some companies are very marketing, sales driven, or digital driven. So in a situation like mine, where it's definitely marketing, sales, usually driving the strategy and the ads, and I sit in commercial operations, there's always that dynamic where we have to find ways to provide a value prop, ultimate decision maker. Two things that I've learned. One was to work together with our long-term strategy group, so enterprise-wide strategy, and realizing that our executive management team actually has been requested across the globe to modernize our customer engagement. They realized that the traditional model face-to-face was probably not going to be sufficient to be competitive, and the pandemic, kind of proved the point. Then we had to start evolving the way we were bringing together with multiple models. So we were able, with some of the work I'm doing now, to anchor that value prop of investing into AI and machine learning into the broader strategic enterprise-wide digital transformation, which is nice because you can always go back to that. If people are wondering why you're investing there, you can anchor it back then. And then the other one has been, for us, it's super important, is really to deliver on strategic objectives of the brands. Ultimately, in order to gain adoption and commitments on the long run, for years, you need to show how's that going to help deliver on the brand performance. And that is usually, those are the two aspects of where we have to start the dialogue, and then we bring people along the way to make sure that when people work on these kinds of, and we can anchor them back into the strategy and then the business objectives. So that has been working for me, but you can't usually,
Thank you. Beerju, same question for you. How do you evaluate all of these different technologies that are options?
Yeah, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed, right, with all this great technology that's coming out every day. But for me, it's pretty simple. We allow the data to guide us in which platforms to vet. And what I mean by that is we routinely survey our physicians on what they're seeing in the market, what trends they're truly gravitating to. And based on that research, we understand which technologies to pursue. And because of that, we can really meet the customers where they prefer to hear from us, because in the research, they're telling us that these technologies are places that they're comfortable receiving information from.
Right, that's helpful. So I'm going to jump back to, Corinne, you started talking a little bit about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so I'd like to get all three of us really talking through, to investigate this a little bit more. Like, what are you seeing happening right now? And then Dany, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what the real promise is and where we could take this. But for Corinne and Beerju, what do you see happening right now in terms of how pharma is using machine learning and artificial intelligence to drive impact today? And Beerju, I'll start with you for that question.
Yeah, sure. So when I think about machine learning, AI, I immediately think about Omnichannel. And Omnichannel is quickly becoming an adopted method of marketing in the pharma space. To me, Omnichannel is providing the right message at the right time to a physician and a platform that they, again, prefer to hear from us. And so machine learning is now enabling us to predict that next best message so that we can really tell a sequential story in the marketplace. The days of pre-approving a single message 6 months in advance are coming to an end. And this very flexible AI-driven marketing is taking its place so that we can allow to tell a personalized story really at all times.
Thank you. And Corinne, I know you are deep in that omni-channel world as well. Is that one of the areas you're seeing applications, or what's the total scope of where you're seeing it make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, we are working slowly but surely towards the orchestrated promotional approach for customers. And the promise is really to deliver this omnichannel, experience. But for me, it's really delivering on the promise that you want the customer wants at the time the customer wants it and the way the customer wants it as well. And ultimately, that should be very much a company's mission. We are here to help customers or help, let's say, healthcare providers provide the better treatment, the better outcome for patients, and we want the same for patients in the way they can continue living a life that they wish for. Medical companies, technology companies work deliver this better experience and better care. It is something that we've talked about for years. I think a lot of companies are in their journey at different points. We are jumping right in, as usually we do, and we can learn from other companies who have done some of that before us. It is a journey, and I would say there's a great promise, there's a great opportunity. It is something, though, that I think we learn on how to do better. I think the technology is there, but it's a matter also of internal change management and getting stakeholders to adopt as well, which sometimes is not always the easier part. The technology, I think, comes easier than.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Dany, thank you for your patience with this. So I'm excited to bring you into this conversation because you really are on the forefront, right, of driving digital transformation to think about what's possible and where are we going. So when we think about this topic about AI and machine learning, what excites you and where do you see the real promise over the next several years or in the future about how it can improve experiences?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. I think Beerju and Corinne already showed the direction this is probably going to take, personalization, and maybe we can add another level of hyper-personalization to really make it in a way of almost one-to-one, or actually one-to-one. The link to that is then also where you can say, well, are we using all the data that we could be using in that omni-channel approach, in that looking at everyone's thinking, what everyone is doing, can you access more data that maybe we are not typically using? I'll give one example. Are we using weather data where people live, where they actually are, into that mix? And before you could say, well, I don't really see the point. But what is possible now with AI and all the systems around it is that, for example, you could say, well, let's just try this out. Does this impact how people respond to my message? Or does this impact to this certain product? If you don't evaluate it, you don't know. But so this is now becoming doable. Before it might have been like, okay, this may be a crazy idea. But one of the advantages of AI is now that you can start to put that into your mix. Another element you could think about going a little bit forward, and again, in that personalization part, is that subdomain of generative AI. So this is actually where you have AI generating itself with minimum input of ourselves, of the human, text or images or video, truly personalized to that person, or into the language of that person prefers. And so these are evolutions that will reduce the effort to make actually that one-to-one message, but at the same time also be a cost saving potentially. So there is a lot out there that's evolving into these directions, and maybe I should just finish off with one element here, that the limitation will be our imagination. Will be our own limitation of how closed is our mind, or how open is our mind to start thinking about other ways of getting that message out or the message through.
I think that might be one of the cool quotes from this session, I'm thinking, about limiting our limitation by our imagination. So I have two follow-up questions for you, Dany, on that. It's interesting to me to hear you talking about the weather and looking for some of these correlations. It almost feels to me like we're moving into this, the realm where like e-commerce companies have been doing this, right? Understanding if you're in London and it's raining, and maybe you pop up the umbrellas or other things to make it more personal. So is that in a sense what you're talking about, is maybe bringing some of those best practices from outside of pharma, but using machine learning to really understand what would drive the needle or move the needle on that?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it is doable. It's out there. So yes, and maybe we need some other technology to make that happen in our space. The Facebooks of the world, they have not the same limitations as we may have from a privacy and so forth perspective. And so that's where other technologies, and maybe we'll talk about that later, but like blockchain can come into to the rescue, where you can actually do a lot of AI, a lot of these wonderful things we might imagine, but where you say, well, hey, we can actually not do that from an ethical or privacy perspective, but where actually technology-wise you can now do these things while assuring everybody privacy. So yeah, it will remain an evolving field with a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. And do you think when you talk about one-on-one, one-to-one personalization, obviously this has been the holy grail of pharma engagement for so long. I mean, how far away do you think we really are? We're getting a little closer, right, with next best action and omnichannel, but in your, how far do you think we really are away from seeing that happen?
I think it can be done today, and so the technologies are there. I mean, if you want, you can create a personalized video message by a human speaking to you with all the elements you want to bring into that. That technology is all there. All the pieces are there. So from a timing perspective, if somebody wants to go that direction right now, it might be a little bit more complicated, a little bit more costs to bring that all together because it's all new. But it's just a matter of time for larger adoption. So yeah, give it a few years to really have that at large scale.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're going to invite you back to talk about that when we get to that point, because it's an exciting opportunity for us for sure. Okay, Corinne and Beerju, we talked a little bit about machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm wondering, I'd like to hear your thoughts also with, we talked about the convergence of all these different platforms, whether it even might be connected TV or chatbots or different social platforms. What else, what else are you seeing happening right now that you feel has great potential for us to drive deeper engagement? And Corinne, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this, I think, in prior terms of social media. I think that for us, for sure, it's still a discoverable channel. We've dabbled in it. I can't say that the company has cracked the nut when it comes to how do you use it fully as an influential channel. However, what we're seeing, especially in the chronic diseases area where we have some, good medication and good therapy for patients themselves now are most likely going to trust their peers, their friends, their family members before they may trust their HCP. They will seek information now, not just YouTube, but TikTok. And now that TikTok has taken over YouTube, and for that new generation of patients, we also have to rethink how we communicate and how do we harness that particular channel, because there's a lot of course, constraints and regulatory concerns on how we can embed ourselves in such a channel. But we're already seeing younger patients sharing, simply how they may inject themselves with therapy and the benefits to them as to why they use a specific product. Something that unfortunately right now we don't have a good control over. Sometimes it may help the brand, sometimes it may not. Sometimes it may be totally off message. So that's something that I'm super curious about. I'm very excited about, but I think I would be one looking to get help a little bit in terms of how do we do this well. And that to me is the future. I just look at my child and my children's generation, Gen X, and they grew up with this. That's where they find information. And as patients, we should be expecting that's the same thing. So I'm just very curious. Don't have an answer, but I can see that becoming extremely important to the industry, and I would be really interested to hear from others.
Yeah, so that's interesting to me. I think I need to hire my 17-year-old daughter as a personal consultant because I don't have a TikTok account. So maybe I need to add that as an action item to start to learn a little bit more about that. So that's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that, and I'll keep my eyes open for that in the future. So Beerju, what are your thoughts? What haven't we talked about today that's interesting to you?
Yeah, and this in line with Dany's comments about personalization, one-to-one engagements. I think virtual assistants, chatbots, they all aim to curate content to help navigate users throughout websites. And I heard an interesting analogy the other day that if folks are looking for a steak, don't drop them in the middle of a buffet. And I thought that was an interesting analogy because sometimes we assume physicians can perfectly navigate our websites and find all the content they're looking for without any hiccups, where sometimes that's really not the case. And so these virtual assistants truly help direct HCPs to the information they're looking for. And I see a lot of value in those types of technology. Yeah,
me too. Thank you for that. So Dany, looking ahead, you and I have had some really interesting conversations around how, a little bit of what you talked about with machine learning and AI, but different ways of thinking, different data sets, different technologies could really play a role in driving engagement and even supporting marketing. Some of the things that we had talked earlier. So what do you feel for our audience? What do we need to have our eyes on for the future, and what do you see coming in these other areas, broader technology?
Well, I need to have your eyes on. We don't have enough eyes. There is so much going on, and kind of like, well, everything is converging at the same time. So, like Corinne was mentioning, there's TikTok. There is like a year ago, Clubhouse. Who knew Clubhouse? I mean, being Clubhouse moderator was a job that didn't even exist. So this is just continuing in that way. We can add VR into the mix. If you think about like how can you think about making it better for the customer? If you we have these examples out there where kids get vaccinated while they're watching a VR game. It's like, well, hey, this was fun to get vaccinated instead of having like a stressful moment. It's a good use of the technology for that moment to make everybody to give everybody an easier life. But then there are also areas where you can just think about cost savings in the whole process. And there's a lot of ad dollars which are spent for which we don't know where they're going or how it has been actually been used from an advertising perspective, and that's kind of a loss or is fraud or websites that are completely not relevant. That's where areas like blockchain can come in to really give that picture of this is where your ad is being shown and not somewhere else, and you get real-time feedback. It goes back to what Beerju was also saying. Like it's that that real time that now we want to know these things now, like the rest of life we are living in. When we order something and what's going on, we have the same expectations. So there's an opportunity there to save money with using these technologies. We talked about privacy. So it's always a difficult choice, like which data do we use, which data do we access. But again, there, the area of blockchain, there is a domain which is called, or a concept which is called zero knowledge proof. And it is like the word says, it's proof without having the knowledge. So this allows you to access data without actually owning the data, without actually having the data. And today, when we do something with AI, we kind of download or we access data. But that's a way to kind of access data without with being able, giving the assurance to people that we don't have your data. We actually don't know it. Maybe our algorithms can access it, but we as a company, we don't know. And so this opens a lot of opportunities, because if you can now access data that otherwise you would stay away from for various reasons, you can now say like, hey, I can use that in my mix to further personalize my access. It's the same example of when you go buy liquor at the liquor store and they ask for your driver's license and just to know if you're 21 years or older. You get all that other information, where you live, the color of your eyes, all that information gets that is given, but it's actually not needed. It's the only thing that person needs to know: are you 21 or older? And so you can apply that same thinking here in accessing data. And so why not also accessing data between companies? There is, I mean, this requires an open mind. This requires other business models. This requires new investigation. But why not? If Novo Nordisk has some really good information, why not have this available to other companies and in a way that can benefit both without actually having the information? So that's another example that's out there. And if maybe I can I throw in one last one?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's kind of a little bit back to generative AI, and it's I mean, cost saving. We all like cost savings. And so what you can now also do there is like if you have a brochure or campaign, you want to have the photo shoot, you want to have the right person, the right profile, the right looks, and all that. You can generate these profiles now completely through AI. And so this also means that you can actually create how people look, faces, anything you would want. Through these computers, and not having to need to go through a whole process of photo shoot and contracts and finding the right person and so on. So again, it's just all these things are going on at the same time and provide really that opportunity. If you have an open mind, if you can think broadly, if you can test and explore other avenues, some will work, some will not. There's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we are getting the hook. Kristen, are we out of time?
Hey, I'm turning my mic on, and who knows, I'm like afraid I'm gonna turn myself off. So hi guys, this was fantastic. I would say, unfortunately not the hook. I think maybe Dany and team and Beerju and Corinne, if you see there was one question asked, because I know we're going into a networking break, unless Tom unless Tom pulls the major hook, then I would say maybe just address that one question. If you guys want to think about, just say, talk to the question of whether we think our biggest barrier, what is that? And then we can move on.
Right. So for everyone, the question is, with the technology being already available to facilitate one-to-one personalization, what do you think is the biggest barrier in achieving that marketing to the HCP? Is it regulatory? Is it cost? Is it something else? Maybe we could give all three of you an opportunity to answer. Anyone want to go first on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I can begin. And it's a great question. One way that we sort of overcame those barriers was simply education. You mentioned regulatory and cost. I think with our regulatory, it's a very different way to go about business and doing personalization. And so when we're talking about asset creation, which we know can get expensive, there actually is a cost savings that you can realize by saying, instead of creating 10 different assets, you're now creating one dynamic asset in its place, so that at any time an HCP can view a display asset, for example, and have a message dynamically placed, versus having a multitude of assets pre-approved that we all know how much it costs to create even one asset. And so having that education, it's a transition period, but I think that's what at least had our regulatory group comfortable. And then on the cost side of things, I mean, cost savings are always a great thing to have, right? So just understanding the longer term picture is something that was valuable and helped us overcome some of those barriers.
That's great. Corinne, your thoughts on this? Corinne,
I would echo exactly what. Yeah, I was just going to say, what you were saying. I think you can hear me. Maybe I'm done for today or no?
Now I can hear you. You're back. I think we can hear you now, Corinne, if you wanted to try it again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, just echoing what was said before.
Okay, thank you. And Dany, last word. Any thoughts on
Sounds
this?
like maybe I'm just too connected. So, Dany.
Okay.
Thank you,
yeah, maybe an absence of an experimental mindset might be a good barrier here. There are things to be tried out. If you say, I want to be sure that I'm going to do A and my results will B, and I'm 100% sure, and otherwise I'm not moving, there's going to be a lot of barriers. We live in a world where everything changes all the time, so it's really hard now to start to say, I know this is going to work or this is not going to work, it's going to be a big success or small success. But maybe you can find ways to try this out in a pilot fashion.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you guys. I think fantastic. It's always good to stay in curiosity and try to convince others of the same. I think is always a challenge. So I think good luck to everybody for doing that. You guys were great.